Welcome to the Connection Codes podcast. This is the podcast where we break open our emotions that take us from being disconnected to connected in our relationships and in ourselves. I am your host, Tara Wages, and I'm here with marriage and family therapist, Dr. Glenn Hill, and his incredible wife, Phyllis, bringing all the love and wisdom. And joining us today is their daughter, Echo Hill Vetter, who is an incredible woman. She inspires me as a mom so deeply, mom of 5. And I'm so glad to get your wisdom today because there is something as a mom that I missed on terribly early on in parenting with one of my children. And that is anxiety. I did not know the signs and symptoms to look for in my children when it comes to what does anxiety look like? What can depression look like? Because I viewed anxiety as just like they do pick skin, picking nails. But I didn't realize, I had a child that was having incredible stomach issues every day, come home, my stomach hurts. Take them to the doctor. They're like, well, maybe it's lactose. Take her off all dairy, off everything. COVID hits, school stops, suddenly her belly never hurt again, never. And it crushed me as a mom because then I was replaying every single morning of forcing, her screaming, me forcing clothes on her, essentially holding her down in the car, tossing her out at the school because I'm thinking, oh, they're just mad about their clothes. That's what they're screaming about. I don't want to wear this sweater. You picked the sweater out. Why don't you want to wear it? And then to look back and think, oh my gosh, this was anxiety the entire time. And so I want to dive in today to what should parents tune into? What are signs and symptoms that we should be aware of when our kids are showing us, but they don't have the words to communicate what's happening? Wow. So I'm ready. Let's dive in.
Probably the lens that has helped me the most in understanding what depression and anxiety even are is trauma and learning more about my nervous system and how trauma affects the nervous system and how chronic unmet needs and chronic unprocessed emotion affect the nervous system. So we talk a lot about depression and anxiety in our culture. I don't hear a lot of conversations about what causes that, what the root cause is, and how to approach that holistically. And we forget, I think, often that our mind, our heart, our body, they're all interconnected. And often what will happen is in our psyche, in our mind, in our body, we will start to experience symptoms. And we have a lack of understanding for how those are connected and what's informing the symptoms or where those symptoms are even coming from. So my understanding at this point, and as I continue to kind of develop, because it's certainly been something I'm very interested in, it's very, very common in our culture for people to kind of bounce between actually anxiety and depression, and how many people have been diagnosed, how many people are struggling with that every single day from children through adulthood or from childhood through adulthood. And so one thing that helps me to visualize is that we all have what's called a window of tolerance. And it helps me to think of it this way, where when we are in our window of tolerance, we are experiencing nervous system regulation. Right. We will experience stressors throughout our lifetime. Every day, it's part of the human experience. But being able to process those stressors is what makes the difference between being able to stay within our window of tolerance, our regulated state, versus an unregulated state or leaving our window of tolerance. So what helps me to picture when you're in your window of tolerance, if you have an elevation, you become dysregulated and you're elevated, that's anxiety. We could say that anxiety, the root core emotion is fear. There's other factors that come into the equation, but it helps me too to visualize, okay, so if the core emotion beneath anxiety is fear, so then typically what's happening is if you leave your window of tolerance, if the stress is too great or the stressor is too great, the stimulus is too great, you go on high alert. Your body, your brain, you go on high alert. And sometimes the response to what the perceived threat is greater, or it appears greater than makes sense. And this is why curiosity is so important, and why following each other's energy is so important. Because we as the parent may observe that our child is experiencing fear, is experiencing anxiety, but to us, it doesn't make sense. It doesn't feel like there's logic. It feels like the response to the experience is greater than would make sense. But to keep in mind that anxiety or elevation or fear all happen when there is a perceived threat, and when the perceived threat is great enough that we leave our window of tolerance, we leave our regulated state. Basically, we go on, what is the word? It's like we're geared up. We're ready to fight. Yeah. We're ready to respond by defending ourselves, by protecting ourselves. And so much of this happens unconsciously.
Absolutely.
It's not that we are thinking through like, okay, yeah, this is what I'm going to do today, and this is how it's going to go, and these are the actions that I'm going to choose. So much of this is happening unconsciously. It's just our brilliant and beautiful body's way of keeping us safe, keeping us protected, keeping us alive, because that's our body's job. That's our nervous system's job. Yeah. So there's a miracle in it all, but it's easy to miss that because it is an overwhelming experience. It can be a very painful experience. So to keep that in mind, to visualize, anxiety is elevated, anxiety is fear. And then on the flip side, and Dr. Hill, I would love to hear more from you. I know that you have a great understanding and a brilliant way of describing all this and explaining all this. But depression also being leaving our window of tolerance. But it is what is the opposite of elevated? It's a lower state. And this too is for protection, which is also really hard for us to grasp at first, because we think of depression as destructive, and it can be what ends up happening with the depression can be destructive. But the process itself, the physiological process of depression, is for the purpose of protecting us. It is for the purpose of keeping us safe, psychologically safe, physically safe. And so in the way that anxiety is leaving the window of tolerance with elevation, depression is leaving the window of tolerance, whatever the opposite of the word elevation is. I cannot think of what it is, but it's basically like a dropping down. Yeah. It's a freeze state. So fight or flight is anxiety. It's leaving the window of tolerance through elevation. And then depression is the freeze state, which is also a way of trying to protect us and keep us safe.
Yeah, I've heard depressed referenced as deep rest, which I just love that's the very time that your psyche, your body is going, whoa, you need some deep rest. You are overloaded. You're just beyond maxed. And I did want to mention, just because I'm sure among our listeners, and I agree with you that typically there's going to be fear connected to anxiety, but for some people it's not. For some people it's a guilt experience, a shame experience. It can just be a pain experience, that this is just pain, and it may be fear of pain or fear of shame. But when when we're not aware of ourselves, when we're not tuned into ourselves, able to follow our own energy, and I think that's the power of the three phrases, to be able to go, oh, what's happening with me here? What am I missing? What am I missing? What am I missing? What's happening? And literally in 20 seconds, we can come to and realize, oh, okay, yeah, I'm feeling a lot of fear about, fill in the blank, about starting this new job tomorrow, and I'm overwhelmed. And of course, the problem is when that's not processed, then I just treat my partner like a jerk when I'm being the jerk, because I'm overwhelmed. It has nothing to do with her. It has to do with my unprocessed emotion. But of course, she doesn't know that it has nothing to do with her. I'm just being unkind to her, and here we are headed to the cyclone.
In parenting, I think, or as a parent, we're so quick to want to judge what is happening with our kids. We don't slow down enough to find out what's happening with our kids. We're like, even I think about when you were talking about the word depression or anxiety, well, it's because you're not being thankful. So we slap my kid is just not thankful. That's why they act so gloomy or so depressed. And we almost have zero tolerance for it. Wow. Like we want them to snap out of it, become, start a thankful journal, or, you're supposed to choose joy, and we don't make space for what is really happening with them. Or, even with what Tira shared to start with, just like she had a child that she missed the signs of anxiety. And so it looks like, she was just being difficult, like wouldn't put the clothes on to go to school, wouldn't wear the sweater. well, when you slow yourself down and go, what is happening here that this reaction, because this reaction didn't make sense other than when you put the label on, they're just disobedient. They're just disobedient and they're defiant. And we label our children with these certain things that then that's, I think, we've mentioned this in another episode where we said, we were definitely in a generation, just spank harder, spank more. You kind of like discipline will force them into the behavior that we expect. But in all of that, you don't ever get under what's happening and what's happening and what's happening. And so in all of this, like even going there, like saying, okay, I've got to slow myself down to be able to tune into my children and to think, okay, what is happening with them and to see the signs. But you got to slow down, because if you're quick to label, well, they're just disobedient, and we even have like they're terrible twos. We have labels as a society that we put on our children. Oh, they're just teenagers. And so then we don't tune in. We put a label on it and go, oh, this is just the terrible two stage. And then we just kind of sit back and survive what we're now labeling as the terrible two stage, instead of tuning in to our 2-year-old and learning them and walking in that with them. And so I think even the labels, even saying, oh yeah, my kid's depressed all the time. Even that is like slapping a label on instead of tuning in and going, wow, what's happening with my teenager? And then sometimes I think we also jump to, well, we just moved. So it's because we just moved, or, well, we just got a divorce. And so that's why they're just struggling. Don't assume by just labeling what's happening with your child. And what's so beautiful, and I love that about the connection codes, is when you get down to the core emotion, you may learn such beautiful things about your teenager or your 2-year-old that you've been missing this whole time in all of this.
Yeah. And I mean, you say teenager or 2-year-old, I've shared a couple times that I've probably learned more about you in the last 2 to 3 years than I have all the rest of our time together. And we're old. We've been together a long time, which startles me. But I think that's the beauty of life, is that we're just continually learning and experiencing, and we're very connected. So, because what I'm about to say is awful, but there are times you share something with me and I go, what? That's not true. That's not what I know, Phyllis. I've been with Phyllis a long time. And again, she knows that I'm teasing. But I'm just so surprised. I had no idea that these things, and I've asked you so many times over the last number of months, I go, wait, is this like a new thing? And of course, then you said, no, I've always experienced that. And I'm like, what? No, you haven't. That's not possible. Again, it's very dangerous to say that, but she knows I'm just being a smartass. But to realize, oh my gosh, this girl has been experiencing this for 4 decades, and I just now found out, like literally after all this time. But again, we're fairly new at connection coding, even though we're the founders of the connection codes, because we just got it in our 50s. And to realize that all these things were happening with you this whole time. And this is just amazing to me, how much we miss with each other, because we don't slow down to say, what's happening here? Catch me up. I'm missing something. And I think, my gosh, I've missed so many tens and hundreds of thousands of things with you. And, vice versa as well. We just didn't have the tools didn't have the safe space to do that. So, and what Tira shared at the beginning, our culture is so much that, this kid is experiencing stomach problems. Well, give him a drug, give him a pill that will counter the stomach issue. And the problem is, so many of these chemicals do work. Now, they have horrific side effects, and they don't solve the problem. They don't actually address the core issue at all, but it is effective. And so we go, see, it's effective. Well, yeah, it is, as far as that one little tiny microscopic view of it, but in the big picture, it's not at all. And so now all this stuff is going to build up over time. We're like, well, we solved the stomach issue. Yeah, but we didn't solve the problem at all. I just always think about this because it was such a powerful, because this is when the connection codes were just gelling. I sat with a family. They had I think she was an 8-year-old little girl, came in, and they had been seeing another therapist because the little girl would bite her fingernails until they bled. And that therapist ended up moving. So that's how they ended up seeing me. And we call that CBT, as far as just cognitive behavioral therapy, because the other therapist had just basically put, I don't know what it's called, but the nasty stuff on the fingernails.
Yeah.
So the little girl no longer bit her fingernails. Well, because of that, she now had fingernails, and she had now become a picker, where she just picked her skin all the time. And when she was sitting in my office, basically every exposed inch of her body had scabs on it. And even as we're talking, she's picking, and her face starts bleeding, which I did not do well with. And I'm supposed to be a good therapist and be present, but I'm getting a little bit lightheaded. But anyway, the parents wanted me to figure out how to get her to stop picking. And so I'm talking to this little girl for a number of minutes, and they weren't rude at all, but I could tell the parents were like, okay, come on, let's get to the solving the problem. Well, then once we spend a few minutes, we found out the little girl is terrified of school. She's horribly bullied. Wow. So every morning, basically every day of her life, she gets up thinking, my life is horrible. Well, that's what's bringing about all this behavior. And even with biting nails, it doesn't make sense. Our bodies are coded. When we feel pain, when we bleed, we go, oh, there's a problem. Well, this little girl would bite her fingernails until they were bleeding. And I'm like, something funky here. That doesn't make any sense. And if we had been able to stop this little girl from picking, now she's going to become a hair puller, and she's going to pull most of her hair out, or she's going to become a cutter or whatever. And the parents were ultimately thrilled, but overwhelmed initially. And they actually pulled the little girl out of that school because they realized, oh my gosh, there's a cause and effect. We just thought she was being immature. She bites her nails, that's immature, stop it. Now she's a picker, well, stop that. And had no concept. And the other therapist probably was doing the best that he knew. But I think what a sad disservice to say, oh, we'll just put basically poison on her fingernails and then she'll stop biting her fingernails. There, we nailed that. We solved that problem. No, we didn't solve anything. I know, I get it. We changed the result. We changed the symptom, but we didn't solve the problem at all.
One foundational shift that would benefit us is to understand and even believe that we are capable of thriving. Many of us don't believe that. We haven't seen it, and we just assume and expect that life will be suffering and we will be in pain and our children will be difficult, or fill in the blank with, whatever label you want to give them. And the problem, of course, with that being, we are constantly missing needs and missing emotion. We're not meeting needs. We're not processing emotion because we're seeing what we expected to see. And so to see a child who is violent, or to see a child who can't cooperate or doesn't cooperate, to see a child who is constantly resisting, if we expect that, if we go into parenthood or we go into any situation or relationship just expecting that it will be difficult and there will be resistance, then we're going to chronically miss their needs, and we're going to chronically miss their emotion. And if we can go into it understanding that actually the human design is brilliant. It's miraculous. It's beautiful. Is it easy? No, it's not easy. There will always be struggle, but it is possible to thrive. It is possible to connect and to stay connected. And we talk so much about root cause and like foundation, because we don't address that culturally. We stay up here with behavior and symptom. We mask symptom. We quiet behavior. We don't acknowledge or recognize or understand that all of that is determined and driven by emotion and need, all of it. So if we can approach parenthood, if we can approach our own children with that understanding of when their needs are met and their emotion is processed, they are capable of thriving. They are capable of connecting. And in fact, and if you think of it as the window of tolerance again, kind of circling back to that, or the regulated state, what we understand now is humans actually are collaborative. They are cooperative. They are creative when they are in their window of tolerance. So if you're seeing a child who's consistently not cooperative, not collaborative, to just kind of let that be your signal that, oh, okay, that means there's an unmet need or an unprocessed emotion. In general, there's going to be times, because of course I'm thinking of the flip side of it, kind of devil's advocate. Obviously there will be times where they have a different opinion. So you guys are going into something and you have a vision for the experience. Well, their vision is different. And so they're going to want to express that opinion. They're going to want to express that difference in opinion. And that's where, as parents, us coming into it with the collaborative mindset of, let me hear you out, and then we will figure it out together. Because there are going to be times, just like, simple example, I want them to wear such and such to this event. Well, they want to wear something different to this event. So it's not a matter of like a chronic unmet need that has them resisting me wearing that. It's that they have a different vision for that, right? They have something that feels more comfortable or that they feel more comfortable in. And so in that specific example, but if you are experiencing that chronically, as in my child is resisting everything, we are never on the same page, we are never on the same team, to recognize, okay, we're missing some things. There are unmet needs here. There are unprocessed emotions here. I am missing it, because that changes your approach. Rather than thinking, I just need to force them even harder, force them to cooperate, to recognize when needs are met and emotion is processed, people cooperate naturally. They do. That's their nature. That's in their nature, is to cooperate and collaborate. The problem is we've created a system, we've created an entire culture around not meeting needs and not processing emotion. And so it's so common and it's so rampant to see people not cooperating, not collaborating, that we can't even recognize that many of us can't even see that that's a possibility, that is in our nature.
Yeah. And something we've done in the field of psychology, which I get it, there's an upside, I understand where it came from, but we have this massive book we call the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, where we've pathologized human behavior. Even things like depression, we go, oh, well, that's a psychological disorder. Well, yes, technically it is a disorder of the psyche, but we don't have to diagnose it, and we don't have to treat that symptom. That's the symptom. Let's find out what led to the depression. And the DSM is in its 5th and I hope final edition. And again, there have been some good things that have come from it, but primarily it's been used to pathologize humans. And we say, oh, well, you're a blank, whatever, you're psychotic or you're schizophrenic and we now realize we know this now. Unfortunately, people still use it, that mentality. But psychological disorders don't exist in a category. They exist on a spectrum. And let's find out what happened that led to this. And again, just like talking about anxiety and depression, with any age, child or adult, where we say, okay, well, we're just going to treat the symptom. We're going to give you a medication that will have an effect. It's not that it doesn't accomplish something. It does, but it doesn't solve the root. It doesn't find out the cause. It simply says, you experience anxiety about this. Well, we will lessen your anxiety level. Okay, but what led to the anxiety? Well, we don't really care about that. We're just going to deal, which is the equivalent of, I walk in the room and your arm is bleeding and I'm like, oh, well, I'll just put some cement over that and your arm won't bleed anymore. There we go. We solved the problem. Well, sort of. Your arm's not bleeding anymore, is it? I put some caulk in there. I got a tube of caulk. I just filled it up. I smashed it down. There. We solved the problem. Well, no, we didn't solve the problem. We just covered over the problem and by masking the issue and dealing with the symptom.
For us, our second born was a son, and he was so different than his older sister, who was very compliant and quiet and obedient. And he was kind of the opposite of that. And we didn't tune in. We expected cookie cutter children. We expected him to have the same obedience as his older sister. And that's where, of course, we have a lot of regret of just our mentality. And of course, what we were taught and given from, elders, church leadership was just spank him more. He will eventually obey. And he had a tremendous amount of anxiety, which we learned when he went to kindergarten. And one particular event where he was supposed to get on the bus to come home with his older sister, well, she was running in just a few minutes. Her classroom was let out just a minute later. So he got to the bus, and the bus driver or the person out there tried to put him on the bus, and he absolutely freaked out, had a temper tantrum beyond all, and laid down on the road in front of the bus and would not get on that bus.
It was a line of buses, so none of them could go.
Screaming. And as soon as his sister came out and went over and was like, Bubsy, I'm here, get up. And he just immediately stopped, got up, held her hand, and got on that bus. But it was such a big event that the school counselor called us in. And it was the first time in our lives that we got help, help beyond the norm, beyond what society was telling us. It was the first time that someone sat with us, and he was so kind and so patient. And he talked to us about our son's anxiety level and that he had a heightened anxiety level in his little body. And the counselor said he'll grow out of it, I'm sure, but he has an anxiety, called it a disorder. And we tuned in, and he just laid out, he said, your son needs, and everything that the needs were, like he needs a little more time. He needs to know the plan ahead of time. When it's time to go to bed, say, in 5 minutes, we're going to get ready for bed. Don't come in and go, it's time to go to bed. His little mind cannot handle that. You got to give him space and time. He needs consistency. And everything that this counselor laid out, Glenn and I looked at each other, and it was the polar opposite of our lifestyle. Yep. We had babysitters all the time because we were very, very busy in ministry. We were at night doing Bible studies almost all the time. So we had different babysitters from the church putting our kids to bed. Well, that with a little boy with heightened anxiety, there was so much fear that he was living in because there was no consistency. There was no schedule. There was no routine. We were just always like lay down and go to sleep wherever we were because we were doing kingdom work. Well, his little body couldn't handle that. Wow. And I am so thankful and will be forever for that counselor that helped us with our kindergartner who said he has this. And it was so, everything he described, it was like light bulbs were going off because that was clear. Like that was the ding, 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 ding. That describes our son. Wow. And so when we knew we had that and we knew now the tools we needed and we were able to tune in, it changed everything. And we changed his bedtime. We changed all of our routines. And he became a very happy little boy who started being on the team with all of us as a family. And I think for those of you who are listening, I know we just touched on this and, there's so much more to be said. And we love your feedback. We love getting more questions, but tune in, slow yourself down. Don't just put a label on your kids. Don't just say, they're just disobedient. They're just defiant. No. Slow down. Slow down and go, what's happening with me? What's happening with them? And find out the need. That's such a good point. So thank you so much for tuning in today.
Wow, that's so true. I'm so glad you shared that story because I think that that's where a lot of parents find themselves at. Like they don't see that there is something happening beneath the surface. They only see the kid kicking and screaming in front of the school bus, or the kid refusing to put on their clothes, or the kid that says they can't get out of the bed. They're seeing these symptoms, but they have no idea how to become that team and that they even need to. You know, they just think, my kid just eats something wrong all the time. You know, I need to start tracing what they're eating. Or they just pick. You know, I have a picker in my house and just trying to help those symptoms disappear. And honestly, we typically want the symptoms to disappear because of the shame we feel from society. So it's not even that we're wanting our kid to be better. So it's oh my gosh, everyone thinks I'm a bad parent because my kid is kicking and screaming. Yeah. Or because my kid is refusing to go to school, so I have to check them in every day. And it's the shame that we feel. And that's why we want the behavior to change.
It's so true. And I was thinking about that. Like even with our son, the way that a counselor described, he said, think about a squirrel. Squirrels are so cute. They're fun to watch. They jump around. They seem so happy. But if you get a squirrel inside of a stadium and they get stuck in a hallway and they get cornered and someone goes towards them because it's a cute little squirrel, they will actually attack that person. And he described, he said, that's what happens with your son. When he feels cornered, when that fear level is so maxed out for him, then he attacks and he looks like, you know, I know we always had complaints, especially like in a situation like with a new babysitter or at church in a Bible class where he would just freak out. Well, it made sense. It was like, he's that little squirrel who is caught in a corner and he doesn't know what to do. And so he is totally freaking out because he doesn't feel safe here. And we just didn't understand that until that counselor made it so clear. And then, of course, it was so overwhelmingly for us that we had been doing this so poorly for years.
Yeah, I get that. Okay, so do y'all want to close us out by doing the wheel together today?
Yeah.
Oh, that would be amazing. Wow, doing the wheel right now. I think after all that parenting talk, really want to just do it on parenting, an issue-specific wheel on parenting. And so when I think about that, I definitely want to start with joy. Just so much joy of having 4 children, 10 grandchildren, and that we're close. We're still close to all 4 of our children and all of our grandchildren, and they all live nearby. And we're able to process a lot of emotion with our children, which I'm so thankful for. Wow, anger. I think there's a lot of anger about what we grew up with, even in our church culture. I think about we were taught that you spank them more, you spank them harder, and just a lot of anger and where that led us. And we trusted that, and we had no knowledge of having emotional health. And I just anger that's not taught more, that's not talked about more. I think for me, a lot of loneliness. It was a lonely journey as a mom, as a parent, and just, even fear of not knowing what to do, and fear of making mistakes that would have long-term effects. I think also I'm feeling fear right now just in this podcast, because I know there's a lot of listeners who maybe really struck hard right now with the things that we've said. And I also always have fear that there will be misunderstanding. So if you have questions, please ask. Let's see. I think that there was definitely, I feel sadness for the things that I did miss as a mom, guilt for being the one who was so task oriented. I am a task oriented person, and that's the way I parented. And I missed a lot of opportunities, beautiful opportunities to connect with my kids, because I was always cleaning. I remember, even after dinner, you would sit and you would talk, and y'all would have such great conversation, and I would jump up and I would clean the whole kitchen while y'all were talking. And now, that regret. I wish I had sat at the table and talked with my children. Let's see, shame in that. Shame in just what I valued back then. Shame that I valued a clean house over really connecting and finding out what was happening with our children. Wow, I've jumped all over. I don't even know which ones do I have left,
I do not.
Oh, goodness.
Hurt.
There was hurt. There was hurt as a mom. I mean, when our children were unkind, I felt a lot of hurt. And of course, I didn't know how to say that. I think we all have memories of just times when our family was erupting, and I would cry silently. I remember times sitting in front of the children's bedroom door and just crying because they were in there having a fit or saying horrible things to me through the door, and just a lot of hurt in those moments, and not knowing how to process, not knowing how to communicate to my kids effectively.
That's amazing. For me, I think when I think of the hurt, I mostly think of what we were led to, and we're responsible for ourselves, but we were influenced so much by our church culture, several church cultures that the old spank them more, spank them harder, and it sure would have been nice to have somebody be aware, and most of the benefit we got was outside of church culture. It was not. It was just so damaging, and so much anger in that, because I'm thinking the message continually was, hey, that thing that didn't work with your kids yesterday, do more of that today. And we did for years and years, and just a lot of anger in that, like, hey, wait a minute. I think mostly core level anger, some secondary, but a lot of primary anger in that. Tons of loneliness, because we were, of course, you and I were not very connected, so we were lost from each other, and so we weren't partnered in this adventure called parenting. Wow. And I just didn't know what to do. And again, if I turned to the church leadership, I knew what the message was going to be, which was very ineffective. And so much sadness in that. It's like, oh my gosh, wow, we just missed so badly on so many things. And so much joy that we're connected with our kids today. There are times, and I do believe it's the number one, the power of the connection goes, but especially the 3 phrases, just being able to say them, we really missed on that. We missed what was happening with you. Of course, tons of guilt in that. And I always say one of the times I laugh the most is when sitting around listening to my 4 children talking about growing up with their dad, and just what a wacky experience that was. But we're able to laugh about that.
Right.
And, again, there's still guilt in it and shame at times. I'm like, oh my gosh, how did I miss so badly? I'm a smart guy. I'm supposed to know better, but I was clueless just in so many ways. And I think for fear, the same as you, these are such delicate topics. And that's my kind of one of my greatest fears, is that we'll do harm in the process of trying to do good. And then people will hear something that we don't mean at all.
Right,
And of course, I hear that with clients all the time when they come back and they're like, well, you told us this. And I'm like, wait, what? How did I misconvey that so horribly? And, I don't know if I misconveyed it or if they misunderstood it or both. But I do have a lot of fear that, we'll end up wounding someone in the process of trying to help. I think I covered all of them. But there's just so much joy in our relationship, certainly with each other, but with our kids now, with their spouses, and with our grandchildren. It's just amazing, the thrill of it all, the beauty of relationship, of deep connection, of life together.
Wow.
Thank you all so much. I think that's so powerful and so relatable. I mean, I know so many parents are in the thick of it, in what you're describing now. They are living it today. And just obviously, if they're listening to this podcast, they're wanting better and they're wanting more for their kids.
It's amazing.
And so that right there is an incredible step. And if you are saying to yourself, I need more information, like I need help on this journey of parenthood, first, you're not alone. And second, we are going to be doing a free webinar, and you can go to connectioncodes.co/stop yelling to join in, where we are going to teach you our proven tool that can help your kids learn to communicate better without yelling. And that's yelling from both ends, like you yelling and them yelling. And so please go to our website, connectioncodes.co/stop yelling, to do that. Share this podcast if you haven't already. Don't forget, we're on YouTube. You can watch, which I think is so fun. And we're just so glad that you are joining us each week. We are going to be doing a few episodes these next few weeks on parenting. But we just love talking relationships, and what you apply to parenting, you can apply to any relationship in your life. So just tune in.
Yeah, and I just want to say that we get emails constantly from families that are like, oh my gosh, this revolutionized everything. I can't believe the effect this has had on the atmosphere in our home. We're not at war anymore. And again, kids are complex. There's a lot to work out, but we're actually on a team now. We're working together, and that's just so thrilling for us. So we want you to know that you need this.
You deserve this.
So let's do this.
Let's do this.